Organizations have issues around microaggressions, allyship, inclusive leadership, cultural competency and cultural awareness, or not understanding what to say, how to say it, what to do, what not to do. Society is reflected in the organization. So if there's things happening in society, organizations will also feel what's happening. Sometimes when you don't feel it personally or live the experience, you don't know that it's even happening. One day it's them, tomorrow it might be you.
Welcome to another episode of Leading Communities podcast, a platform where we help develop discussions on topics vital to local communities and offer insights from both a leadership perspective and the community's viewpoint. Join us as we explore the issues, stories and experiences that shape our communities and inspire change. Romain Muhammad is the founder and CEO of Diversify World, a mission-driven organisation empowering companies to build diverse teams and create anti-racist, inclusive and equitable workplaces. With over a decade of experience in talent acquisition, Romain is dedicated to helping organisations transform their work environments. He's a passionate public speaker and writer and draws on personal, academic and professional experiences to challenge norms and reshape narratives. Romain's work focuses on empowering marginalised and unrepresented communities in the workplace with the goal of fostering true inclusivity and equality. In this episode, we'll delve into pressing topics of social discrimination and workplace diversity, with a focus on the recent riots in the UK. And we'll also examine how racism and unconscious bias affect our society and shape our interactions and institutions, as well as looking at the hidden impacts of some of these biases and think about practical strategies for fostering genuinely inclusive environments. Thank you for joining me, Romain. So, in your view, how have the recent riots in the UK highlighted issues of social discrimination and racism?
I think that's a really, really good question. And I think that the recent race riots, racial terrorism, and the rise of the far right, right-wing populism it's just highlighted tensions that have always been there, but maybe they've been misplaced or kind of put under the carpet, so to speak, hidden under the table by false policies such as multiculturalism and which have failed, and policies around assimilation, which also have failed. So these things have always been there, and I think that when we look at each year, it's almost like there's something new that's happened. So this year there was all the stuff around immigration. That was the big buzzword. That was the big policy this year, Rwanda, which was very, very racialized in its conception. In its inception, it's very, very racialized. When you look at this year, Diane Abbott was basically said that she should be shot effectively because she is a black woman by one of the biggest Tory donors in this country, who also went on to have other contracts after he said that, and didn't really apologize, and there was no kind of repercussions for him saying that type of statement. So this is a trend. Okay, it's a constant trend. A couple of years ago, there were racist trolls who were, sending death threats to the football players because they missed penalties in the 2020 Euros, and this is something that constantly happens. I wrote a post about it on LinkedIn, which is got quite a lot of feedback and a lot of people interested in it and saying how insightful it was. Because what I basically said was that this riots that we've seen in the last sort of 4 to 6 weeks as a part of a whole history of riots that have taken place in this country since the 20th century, really. We've had, and probably even before, there's riots, but probably the most notable one that we know of is the 1919 race riots, which was as pervasive and widespread as the riots that we had a couple of weeks ago. In its geographical nature, there was riots in South Shields, riots in Cardiff, Liverpool, riots in London, and actually someone died, a guy called Charles Button. He was murdered. So, it's a part of a series of race riots that have happened in this country for the last 100 years. But I think because of the way history is taught here, the curriculum, and the fact that we almost, when we think about race relations here, we always kind of offshore it, or we think about the US context, right? We think about how racist the US is and how much of a problem the US has and how much, people had to fight for racial freedoms and equalities, etc., in the US. But we don't understand that there were things happening here. There have always been things happening here. Ku Klux Klan isn't just a US phenomenon. There was a Klan here, there was a chapter here, there was crosses being burnt here. So I think that it's really, really important that we contextualize it like that, and we understand that, what we're seeing is nothing new. It's just part of a whole historical context of race relations and tense race relations that this country has always had.
So from what I'm hearing you say, would it be fair to say then that the recent riots weren't a surprise to you?
Oh, no, of course not. No, 100% no. There's been, when we look at every decade in this country, for the last 100 years, there's been riots. There was riots in the 2012. The London riots started out as a Tottenham riots, and people might say, well, that wasn't really a race riot. That wasn't really racialized. Well, it was. When we look at the cause and effects of it, it's over policing of certain communities that have a history of being over policed and have a history of police resistance. It wasn't too far from Broadwater Farm, which was the scene of the riots in 1981. And we had the 1985 riots as well, which was a whole, again, widespread riots across England. There were riots in the 70s, there were riots in the 60s, riots in the 50s. One of the famous riots is the Notting Hill riots, which is where the Notting Hill Carnival stemmed from in 1958. So there has always been riots in this country. And when you add into that the notions and ideas that have been pushed and supported by government, individual government ministers talking about immigration, and really racializing immigration. When we have that, which almost fuels the right-wing sentiment that, some members of the country have. And then when you add in to the media's representation of some of these ideas around immigration, around migration, around race, around ethnicity, etc., we create this kind of hybridized system, which has the media on one hand representing information. It has the politicians on the other hand, kind of almost giving, legitimizing what the media is saying, and then we have, people believing in that and it fueling their ideas or tensions around economic protectionism. Oh, they're stealing our jobs. They're stealing our houses. They're stealing our resources. Each and every riot that has happened, it has been some element of economic protectionism or othering, other certain communities being othered. And when communities continuously and consistently become othered, they become a target. And we've seen in the recent riots, the communities that have been the target. And those communities that have been the target have always been the target.
So, I hear the passion behind what you're saying and can understand that this is something that you are very well versed on. Your work is very much focused in organisations, and I suppose there being a better understanding of what some of these issues are. What would you say are the issues right now overall in the organisations that you serve, and maybe others that maybe could do with your expertise?
Yes, I'd say the issues in organizations, because, I think it's really important, and I say this to organizations as well, is that we have to see organizations as almost the micro aspect of society. Society reflects society is reflected in the organization. So if there's things happening in society, for example, there might be issues happening for international relations, or there's things happening, organizations will also feel what's happening, even from a censorship perspective, people not feeling like they can speak about issues, it might directly affect them. They might have family in some of these parts of the world. They might be directly impacted, but they feel like they can't speak about it because if they do, they will face some type of backlash. So we have to see organizations as almost mini societies that are impacted by the larger society. So if society has a problem with racism, or society has a problem with systemic racism, or society has a problem with inequality or issues around social class and social mobility, we will find those same problems in these organizations. So whatever problems society has, we find those in organizations. Organizations also have those problems because organizations are a reflection of wider society. So when we look at some of the organizations that particularly I work with, we find, gender pay gaps, for example. We find barriers to progression. So certain peoples from certain backgrounds, certain communities find it difficult, more so than disproportionately than other groups of people to progress, to get promotions. There seems to be a bottleneck somewhere, right? There seems to almost be, from a perspective of associate and junior level members of staff, maybe that might be where diversity is. There might be diverse juniors. But when we start getting into middle management, sort of senior leadership teams, and particularly around executive C-suite level individuals, we see that that's not truly diverse. So there's bottlenecks somewhere. And organizations have issues around microaggressions, allyship, inclusive leadership, cultural competency and cultural awareness, not knowing or not understanding what to say, how to say it, what to do, what not to do. Companies have issues when it comes to things being more performative rather than impactful. So doing tokenistic gestures. So a case in point, we've got Black History Month coming up in October, and we might see organizations, put on an event. It might be a decent event. It might not be so decent in terms of the impact of the event, but that might be the only thing they do throughout the whole year. So for me, that is something that's tokenistic. You can't say that you are committed to true equality, true diversity, true inclusion, true anti-racism, true justice, freedom, and equality for all people if you only do things when it's the time, when it's a calendar, like when it's calendarized.
Yeah.
So these are, I guess, some of the issues that we're seeing in organizations, but they're also issues that we see in society.
Do you feel that there is a genuine appetite within organisations to address these issues? Or is it more of a situation where, so I suppose in a way, to rephrase that question, we talk about things like unconscious bias, okay? So the suggestion in that is that they don't recognise necessarily some of the activities that they're doing or not doing that are creating these environments. But the question is some of it conscious? Or do you feel that it is a case that organisations have the appetite to do the right thing but don't know how to? Or actually, there are still organisations that are not really that interested in doing the right thing?
Yeah, it's a bit of a mixed bag approach and answer I'd give to that. I think it's very subjective. Some organisations do have a propensity and an appetite to change, and they do want to do things and get things right. And there are some organisations that I work with that do seem really committed, and the reason why I say that is because they're trying to do everything in their power to really create some change, and I could take my hat off to them to say, do you know what? I think you are one of those organizations. And there are a lot of organizations, I think, a lot of organizations who might be doing things from a more of a performative perspective. It's not, because you got to think about it. Like I said, organizations are reflective of society. If we're going to truly decolonize society, it would mean that privilege and power structures that have been ingrained for hundreds of years and are reinforced by inequality, oppression, slavery, colonialism, etc., it means that those will there would be no more, right? So it means that those who held and still hold the power structures and the authority would no longer have that. So I think when it comes to society, trying to be completely fair and equal and be decolonized and, fair for everyone, we'd have to ask society and ask those in power and those in charge, are you really willing to relinquish some of your power, wealth, and authority, and create an equilibrium for all, where anyone, regardless of color, creed, whatever, can attain where you are and what you have, and it's a fair, equitable, a level playing field for all. Are you really willing to do that? And I think we could take that same question and ask these organizations: are you really willing to do this? Because it could mean that the same influence and power structures that you have in this organization will be no longer. So that's how I would, I guess, phrase that. And I think that because maybe organizations and those at the top of organizations aren't truly willing to relinquish their seat for me or someone else that looks like me, sounds like me, potentially, I think that's why we have the problem of things being tokenistic or performative or done to look like we're doing, but we're not truly doing. We don't mind having one, I'm saying hypothetically, organizations saying it now. We don't mind having one, we don't mind having two, we don't mind having a few, but we can't have all of them, can we?
So what would you say then are some of the more effective strategies for actually addressing these issues within organizations? Because I always feel like when it comes to the subject of racism, it can be very difficult to effectively change somebody's thinking. So how do you, on an organizational level, create a space that allows, despite the thinking, the space for exactly what you're talking about, something that's much more fair and equitable?
Well, it starts with having honest conversations, open conversations like this, where, nobody is beating around the bush. Nobody's trying to, we get rid of white guilt. We get rid of white savior complex. We take those things completely out of the equation, because what it does, those things paralyze people from being able to try to truly understand and truly empathize. We don't need sympathy, but we need you to understand. We need you to see, okay? When someone says, for example, I don't see race, I don't see color, but we're off to the wrong foot, because we need you to see. I need you to see and understand, because only from when you see and understand, then we can start having honest conversations. And when we have honest conversations, you would be able to somewhat try to resonate with my thoughts, my feelings, my experiences, my lived experiences, etc. So we need to start having honest conversations, but those honest conversations can only start from a place of, getting rid of some of the barriers that stop those honest and uncomfortable conversations from happening. So I think that's the start of it, okay? And it's going to take almost, one of the things, just bringing up Black History Month this year, the title is Redefining Narratives. And I like that, because my session for Black History Month last year was actually redefining narratives. Well, I think it's theirs is reclaiming narratives. Mine was redefining narratives, and it still is redefining narratives. Very, very similar, just semantics. But I think that almost needs to happen, a redefinition of narratives, like what we think we know, or what we think we've been told, or what we've been taught. That almost needs to be redefined, and us to be re-educated in a way where power, these notions of power, privilege, and that are so ingrained, immigration and the other, and all these things that create this society that has these different hierarchies, and I think that needs to happen. That those conversations need to happen, and we need to start to think about things in a much different way. So I think that needs to happen. I think that, and because when it comes to things like positive action, we have here, or affirmative action, they call it in the US, some of that stuff, and I can understand why it was brought in, and I think there's been a backlash against it recently, but I can understand why it's been brought in. But some of that can be very, very, again, tokenistic and tick box exercise-ish, okay? Again, we can't just say that, we're going to hire diverse people in organizations if when they get to the organization, they don't feel a sense of home, belonging, and a sense of their true identity. They have to change themselves. They have to shapeshift into someone else by day and then go revert back to their old self by night as soon as they leave the office. Like that doesn't work and that doesn't help. What we will see from that is just high attrition rates and people leaving organizations. So it has to be done at a base level where we have these honest conversations. We have these honest kind of analytical surveys or discussions, like how truly diverse is your organization? Like, not just from a gender perspective, also from a racial and ethnic perspective, how diverse is that organization?
No, it seems like there's a lot of that has to be uncovered.
Yeah.
In those spaces.
I might not see it in my lifetime. I'm only 32, but I might not see it in my lifetime. Maybe my grandchildren will. Oh. When I have them, that is.
Fingers crossed, yeah. I was just going to say, fingers crossed we see it at some point. I think that's the thing, isn't it? We want to see it at some point. Yeah. So just thinking about sort of how things can move forward. I mean, you've given lots of examples there. You've talked about lots of different things that create an impact and have the potential to create impact. I suppose my question, I mean, you just said, potentially your grandchildren will see a change. Do you feel like we are moving in the right direction, societally and organisationally?
The cynic in me would say absolutely not. And, the reason why the cynic in me would say that is because we're seeing the recent race riots, right? And like I said, the cause and effect, it being from media level and from government level. And I could just, like I said, use examples from the 1919 race riots and show you news clippets of what the media were saying and what politicians were saying at that point and say, well, it's 100 years between, it's the same outcome and the same cause and effect and the same representation. So things like that kind of maybe paint a slightly different scenario of have we got forward, have things changed? But when I think about the work that I do on a day-to-day basis, I don't think I would, if I had, my mum's generation, for example, my mum was born in 1971, so she was that kind of resistance generation. And I don't think I could have done what I'm doing now then. I definitely couldn't have done it in my grandma's generation. She came to the UK from Jamaica in 1961. So there is progress, and I'm delivering proof. I'm a legacy of that progress. Okay, but at the same time, there's still a lot more work to be done. And what we see in the news, in the media, from politicians, and then on the streets of the UK just shows that there's a lot more that needs to be done.
Do you feel like some of the policies maybe that have been put in place, again, both organisationally and societally, when we think about things like political correctness, as an example, do you feel that those things have been more harmful to the cause or helpful?
Yeah, again, subjective. It depends how you look at it. I think that some elements of political correctness have been good. Some elements of political correctness have been good. They forced us to have to think in certain ways and have to do things and not be able to say things. However, I think that what political correctness does is it just creates a space for people to think in the same way that they used to think and not be able to challenge ideas or redefine narratives because people can't say that which they feel. But they will smile in your face and they'll say, oh, hello, how are you, et cetera, et cetera. But what it creates is this really strange type of resentment or for someone or hatred or discrimination that's not in your face, that's over the keyboards on YouTube or Instagram, where people feel safe when they can type stuff, okay, and they can do stuff under really strange usernames, et cetera, but they have to hide it. And when we hide it, it means that we can't actually move forward because it's not out in the open. And then what does happen is then you see an explosion of in the example of the recent race riots, where where people have felt a type of way for a long time, but haven't been able to vocalize it or feel like they can't vocalize it, or these open conversations are not happening because people are afraid to say or do that which they actually feel. We can only move on from that if people have a space to say and say what they feel, and we can have an open discussion and try and challenge it and say, well, why do you feel like that? What is it that made you feel like that? This. Oh, actually, maybe think about it in this particular way. So yeah, I think that there's been some good, but I think to an extent there has been some harm.
So in terms of how we move forward then, you talked before about redefining the narrative. What do you feel that starts that process? How do we begin the process of redefining the narrative?
We begin the process of redefining a narrative by us not running away from the fact that there's a problem. I think that when we have politicians that tell us, that the UK, Britain is not a racist place, that there is no institutional racism here, it doesn't exist. When we have reports written and that's what is said, we're not at a good start. We're not at a good place. Okay, because we're starting off at a back foot, which means that there is no need to redefine a narrative that doesn't need to be redefined, because that is the narrative, right? So I think that that's one way we need to start, that we need to understand, not just in our organizations, but on a community level and society level, individually, we need to understand that there's an issue. And as much as the recent riots were a terrible thing, it's a reminder to all of us that it's not all roses and daffodils. It's not all hunky-dory. There is a problem here. And that shows us. Sometimes when we have these, like a political correctness and it goes on for so long, that's when we see these notions of equality and fairness and non-racism being said, because there's nothing that has spiraled out of control to show us. There's nothing that's exploded. Malcolm X called it a powder keg. Okay, so when a powder keg explodes, there'll be a racial explosion, and a racial explosion is worse than an atomic explosion. That's what Malcolm X said. And I think we can use it in this context as well, in the sense that when that happens, it's almost like everything gets exposed. All the misconceptions that we've been given almost come to light, and we start to say, wow, okay, there is a problem. Some of us always knew it and always felt it, but sometimes when there's a saying, who feels it knows it. Sometimes when you don't feel it personally or lived experience, you don't know that it's even happening. So I would say that needs to happen, but also from a perspective of whether you're a person of color, whether you're people from a global majority background, a Black person, an Asian person, even if you're a white person. We have to create a level of solidarity, a level of allyship, a level of, cross-community kind of cohesion, in that we need to start speaking to each other and learning about one another. We can't see ourselves as these almost siloed individuals and not caring about what's happening over there. Okay, once we start seeing ourselves like that, it cuts off that level of community that actually there was in the 60s and the 70s. So we need to be able to start to have that. And I think all people, just because it might not affect you per se, you might not be from that specific community, we should care about what's happening, because one day it's them, tomorrow it might be you.
So what I'm hearing then, and I suppose my final question to you in this regard is it fair to suggest then that when we see the recent unrest that we have in the form of the race riots, that actually is a form of powder keg explosion that reminds everybody that actually there are still some serious issues here that need to be addressed?
Yeah, 100%. That is exactly what I'm saying. Sometimes you can try and cover up powder keg, and you can cover it for so long and try and reinforce it, with other materials, just try and hold things in. When it When it goes, it goes. And it shows us all the things start coming out of that powder keg, right? And it starts spreading. And it just shows us, wow, what was there the whole time, which I knew it was there the whole time.
And now everybody else does too.
Now everybody else does too. And now we're at a stage now where we can start speaking about things, and we won't hear this notion of Britain not being UK not being a racist place, and only America's racist, but only France is racist. Oh, it's not like that here, So, yeah.
In fact, it is. Romain, thank you so much. It's been really insightful to hear your perspective and your views. I'm hoping that from the people that do listen to this podcast, what they're able to do is really start those honest conversations if they're not already having them. And if those conversations are taking place, ensure that there are more people like ourselves, like yourself, that is party to that conversation, that is around the table, that actually is in a position to educate, to support and to influence their appetite to create a more diverse environment, whether that be within their organisations or their wider communities. Thank you for that.
Thank you very much. Cheers.
Thank you for listening to another episode of Leading Communities podcast. We will, of course, be back with another one real soon. But in the meantime, let's hope that this one's got you thinking about the fact that racism is clearly an issue that is apparent here in the UK. It's affecting our local communities. It's affecting our organisations. And if we start to recognise that that powder keg can blow up at any point, maybe we can start to put the pin in it to stop it happening again in future. Thank you. See you next time.
Thanks for listening. Don't forget to keep up to date with all things leading communities.